So, welcome to Dialplan scripting for non-programmers. Randy is also, love this guy. As I said, Billy Chia, I work in the marketing department at Digium. So you may have seen my videos. If you've seen a video and it has a Digium phone in it, I probably made that video. So I'm a decap trainer, so I've written some of the decap tests and some of our advanced training. You can find me on Twitter and LinkedIn. So I would appreciate if you guys would, again, if you guys happen to have cell phone service, if like you're on Verizon, shoot out a tweet and we will get the task. So my goal in the next 30 minutes is to give you 3 basic examples. I want to show you how to do a test extension in the Dialplan, how to do a dial subroutine, and of course some of you just got out of Claude's very informative AGI, so mine will perhaps be slim, but hopefully we had some new people in and it's a different audience. So with that in mind, basically, I personally came to Asterisk from a sysadmin networking background. So I was an IT guy and worked with networking mostly, but also telephony, and came to Asterisk and had never done any type of scripting. I was an IT networking guy, and I had never done any type of programming. So of course, in Asterisk, when you program the Dialplan, it really is like programming. And so I imagine that many of you in this room perhaps have a similar background. You've come from system administration, networking, perhaps traditional telephony, and that's what I had in mind to give an introduction to Dialplan programming. With that said, I'm basically assuming that you came to my talk yesterday and that we're starting from the ground up. So I'm assuming that you already have some background knowledge, you know what a context extension priority is, and that you know some basics of the Dialplan. And like I said, as I teach classes and I meet people, I tend to find that this is what they ask about a lot. They say, I can do some stuff in the Dialplan, but I just need that extra step. So I hope in the next 30 minutes to give you that extra step. With that being said, if you are already a developer and this is way below your level, please be kind on the review form. And if you are brand new and you're like, man, this is super lame, he's basically saying I needed the talk yesterday to understand this talk, I apologize, and please come see me in the hall, and I would be happy to break down the very, very basics. I would encourage you to still hang out, that you're going to learn the types of things you can do in Dialplan from the presentation, even if all the syntax doesn't make sense. So with that said, if you're not a developer, maybe you don't know about programming languages. So just as I kind of treat this half hour like a CS 101, Computer Science 101. There are many different kinds of programming languages. Some are compiled, some are interpreted. You've got C, C++. If you're autistic, you can program in Lisp. And these interpreted languages, it means it spins up an interpreter. You can run them live. So actually, your bash shell, when you log into Linux, is actually a bash interpreter for the bash shell scripting language. You can run programming commands at the command line, and it'll spit back responses to you. You'll actually run that in the interpreted language. It doesn't need to be compiled. The Dialplan, on the other hand, is what we would call a lightweight scripting language. It's configured in extensions.conf. So there are many ways to configure Dialplan. You can configure it in AEL. You can bump the configuration down to real time. You can actually add extensions from the CLI. But I'm going to be particularly talking about the syntax in extensions.conf. And it's parsed when the pbxconfig file is loaded. So it's not a compiled language. It's not really even interpreted language. It's lightweight scripting, and it's actually parsed. So that means when the pbxconfig is reloaded, and you guys will be familiar with the command dialplan reload. When you do dialplan reload, it goes out to the text-based file, and it reads in that configuration file. The particular purpose of the Dialplan language is for call routing. So we'll talk about that as a function. So here are some components. Like I said, hopefully you're familiar with the context, extension, priority, and application. And what I would like to talk a little bit more about are variables, functions, expressions, and subroutines. If I have a little time, I will also talk about AGI. So we should kind of be familiar with this basic syntax. Up at the top here, this is an inside context. Contexts are denoted by square brackets. And that basically means create a bucket. I'm going to put some scripts in. Okay? And the scripts are extensions. So here we have extension 100. The syntax is extend equals greater than, extension name, comma, priority, comma, application. And here are some applications: answer, playback, dial, voicemail. And we've passed some arguments to the application. So if you're not familiar with programming, we would call this an argument that's being passed to the playback application. In this case, it's an audio file, hello world. If we had another audio file like, we recorded one and it said, AGI is great, then we could call it AGI is great. And you could pass that as an argument. It's going to behave differently depending on the arguments passed. So your best friends are going to be the CLI commands. So if you want to be a Dialplan scripter, you are going to need to do this. You're going to absolutely, as an imperative, on your Asterisk system, run core show applications. It will print out a list to you of all the applications available on your system. It won't print out to you all of the Dialplan applications ever because it's going to be dependent on what modules you have loaded with an Asterisk. That's okay. On your Asterisk system, if you're new to the game and you want to get up on board, do core show applications, and it's going to print out a full list for you. You're going to want to read that whole list just to familiarize yourself with the sorts of things available, right? What possibly can I do? Kind of like Claude just spoke about. He said, do AGI show commands? Same kind of concept. Go over that list. When you want to drill down into a particular application and learn about this, what does this application do? What's the syntax for this application? The syntax is core show application and then the name of the app. For example, core show application dial. So let me see if I can screen cap for my friend there, and on my terminal, if I go into asterisk core show application, and let's just pick an easier one, I'll try playback. The idea here is you can see there's a wealth of information for you. The documentation is built into asterisk. It's really amazing. So it tells you a synopsis of what that does. This one's very simple. It plays a file, right? It gives you a description. It tells you what variables are set by that application. And most importantly, it gives you the syntax for that application. And I want to show you guys how to interpret this syntax. So the idea is you're always going to have the application name. You're going to have a parentheses enclosing the arguments. And then it's going to tell you what the arguments are. Different applications expect different arguments. If it's something like this, file name, that means it's a mandatory argument. You have to pass a file name or the application won't work. Some applications, for example, like answer, you can call answer with no arguments at all. They're all optional. Now these ones over here with the square bracket, that means it's optional. So the options you can pass after the comma, see the comma there? That means you don't have to, but you can. And likewise, you can play multiple sound files by concatenating. That means joining together multiple sound files with an ampersand. So I could do file name 1, ampersand file name 2, ampersand file name 3, dot, 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 on and on and on. That's how to interpret that syntax. And it's the same relatively to read the syntax for all of the applications. So do core show applications, do core show application name. I would say just as an exercise on your VM or your box that you SSH into tonight, do this as an exercise. And likewise for core show functions, and then core show function name. And I'll teach you a little trick if I can find the right screen here. When you do core show function, and let's say we're doing timeout, right? If I say core show function timeout, it says, I have no idea what that is. This is because all functions in asterisk are caps. So if I tab complete, right? So if I start typing timeout and I tab complete, that's you hit the tab key, it'll complete the rest of the phrase. It'll pop it into all caps for you, and that way you can likewise see how that function works, okay? Moving right along, let's look at our test extension. So why would you want a test extension? The idea is if you're going to do a lot of Dialplan scripting, you're going to want to be able to test rapidly to prototype. So you really don't want to be sitting there and put in a script or testing out some Dialplan logic And then every single time you have to call from your phone. So I dial the extension from my phone, I dial from the extension from my phone. What you really want to be able to do is to be able to hit your script from the CLI. Now, we want some things to do. We don't just want to hit any script from the CLI. We basically want to be able to bridge two channels together, a test channel together with whatever it is that we're testing. And we want that test channel possibly to do some things. So at a minimum, I could possibly just say, well, answer this channel and wait around for a certain period of time and then just hang up. If all I need is an open channel for my other logic to execute, that'll be just fine. In my case, I've created this Dialplan logic because I want audio. I want media to play on the channel. So this would be if I was testing some call recording logic, or if I'm testing over a phone and I want to answer it and I want to hear that media. So let's unpack this step by step. First, at step 1, I have called this extension test. The name of the extension is literally test. Keep in mind that not all Dialplan applications, they don't need to be named after numbers. Because this one I never dial into it, I always call it from the CLI. It's much more convenient to have a name. Priority 1 answers the channel. Then at priority 2, I'm going to set a variable. This should all be review from yesterday or familiar. Set the variable count to 0. This is called initializing the variable. If I forget this step and I just try to call a variable, I can get very strange behavior or it just won't work at all. So this is important to always initialize the variable. Then here I'm going to play back an audio file called TT Monty Nights. Then I increment the count. Here I'm using an expression, which is $square brackets. And I'm saying set the count variable to its previous value plus 1. Then I'm routing conditionally. Is that value less than 3? If not, if that's true, if it is less than 3, then go to default test play, which is the default context, the test extension, and the play priority. I use a priority label there. And if not, you can see I've omitted the false destination. It's just going to fall through to the next priority. So the way I do this on the CLI, maybe, is it looks like this. We're going to do channel originate, OK? So the syntax for channel originate is from the Astra CLI. You do channel originate. And I'm going to use the local channel. The local channel is not like a SIP channel or a DOTI channel. It's like an internal channel that allows me to treat a Dialplan extension as though it was a SIP channel. And I can bridge it to specifically to an application. In this case, I want to bridge it to an extension. And so I bridge it to whatever extension at context I want to test. So if I go to my CLI and I do channel originate local, because it's a local channel. So this is like technology/resource. The same way you would dial SIP/phone1 or DOTI/channel1. Here I'm dialing local/test. And normally that'd be test at default, but if it's the default context, you can leave it off, which is why I like default for testing. But as a security notice, never, ever, ever put your logic in the default context. So just for security purposes, don't use a default context. Create a default context. Hang up on every call that goes there. That's just for security. So I'm going to bridge to an extension. I will bridge to the test extension. And now I can see, I didn't have to make a phone call off a phone. I can see with my test extension, I did channel originate, and I can see my Dialplan logic executing. This is called debugging. Essentially, what I want to do is I want to run my script, and then I want to ask myself, did it actually run? So I can see here that it did. It's giving me a wealth of information. It's telling me I executed test at default, at priority 1, and there's 2 different channels. Here's the name of the channel. So this, you can see they almost have the exact same name, except this one is 1 and this one is 2. So it's actually 2 channels bridged together. First it answers, then you can see it sets my variable, it's playing back, and here I can see that my, my audio file is played, and that's just going to keep going through that loop. So I can do a channel request, possibly request, hang up all, and hang up on those channels. So like I said, the CLI is your friend, and this is basically how to code, right? How do I code? Well, write some code, run the code, fix the bugs. Step by step is how to write some code. The idea would be, the CLI is where you want to change your code. When I meet novice scripters, when I meet people from an IT background that don't have a computer science degree, and they start learning Dialplan scripting, and they find an error in the Dialplan, immediately they open up extensions.conf, and they start reading through trying to find their syntax error. You're not going to find it. And I'm just, as a loving friend, I'm just telling you, close the text file, open up the Asterisk CLI. On the Asterisk CLI, it's so rich because it tells you exactly how Asterisk sees that file, and I'll demonstrate here. So let's say I have extensions.conf, and here is my test extension hidden amongst all my stuff I did yesterday. Okay, and let's just say as an example, I forgot, I just had a typo, and I forgot to type in that parenthesis, right? If I'm on the Asterisk CLI, right? And now let's say I execute my command, right? I've written a script. I want to test out the script. I can test it like this, and look at what happens. I get a warning here, and it's telling me, hey, there's no such application as count equals 0, such and such, and it's telling me exactly where the problem is. It says that the default context and the test extension at priority 2, Billy, you have screwed something up again. So I can open up extensions.conf, and I can see, oh, here's my test extension of my default context. At priority 2, oh, and in fact, if you're using Vim or some other nice text editor that does syntax highlighting, I can even see I messed that up. So that's kind of the process of debugging. When you run the script, you want to run it on the CLI. You want to be very familiar with the verbose output to see it step by step. Now when I do Dialplan reload, now when I originate my test, hey, it runs beautifully, and I can hang up on the channels. So let's actually jump into a subroutine. So you know, what's a subroutine? Well, I like to use the analogy of programming kind of like baking a cake. And I ripped this off from the guy from MIT. He does some computer classes online and came up with this analogy. I think it's very apt. The idea is when you're baking a recipe, what do? Well, you go into your recipe box, and your recipe box has a whole bunch of recipes. So you pull out a recipe and you say, I want to follow this recipe, and you're going to follow it step by step. Well, that's just like programming. Think of your context, your Dialplan context, as a bucket like your recipe box. It's got a whole bunch of scripts in there. Every extension is its own recipe that's going to be followed step by step in order, right? Now, sometimes what you want is you want to have something that's where you're doing something until a condition is met, right? So imagine beat these eggs until they're stiff, right? That's like a loop. That's like a loop in programming. So what you want is you want to create some kind of condition, and then when that condition is met, you stop looping. That's kind of what we saw in the test extension, that it's going to loop through until I finish my condition. In the test case of my test extension, it was when I've repeated it 3 times, right? Now, what happens when I've got a recipe, and this is a really good recipe. Now, this is where the analogy breaks down. It's a really good recipe, and I want to use it over and over and over again. So maybe the same recipe works good for lemon cake and cherry cake and, you know, cream pie cake. And what if I want to use it over and over again? Do I have to rewrite it every single time? And the answer is no. The beautiful thing about programming, about scripting, is you can do it once and then access that code over and over and over again. It's very efficient. And so the concept of a subroutine is that's all it is. It's basically saying I have a little piece of code, and I want to get it a lot. I want to use it over and over again. In this case, let's imagine I have many phones. I have 100 phones. I have 1,000 phones. And I want to write a dial script to dial the phones. Now, I want to have features for my users. In some cases, I want Find Me, Follow Me. So some users, I want to ring their cell phone first via Find Me, Follow Me, or however the user wants their profile set up. And then some users, they just want to ring the desk phone. They don't want Find Me, Follow Me, or maybe they want both. And then for some users, they want voicemail, and maybe some users don't want voicemail. Now, what I could do for all my 100 phones is I could program that series of routines over and over again and just type the same code. But that's not efficient. I don't want to do that. What I want to do is a Dialplan subroutine that allows me to write the code once and access it over and over again. So this is what the Dialplan subroutine looks like. It's a little bit small on the slide, so I will expose it on the CLI, which is probably, you guys can see that a little bit better. Okay? The idea here, and let me make sure I have my right things commented, okay? So at the start, I'm using GoSub as my Dialplan subroutine. Now, how many people are familiar with macro? Have you used macro? Okay. How many people have used GoSub? Okay. So the beauty of GoSub, in fact, macro in the modern versions of Asterisk is deprecated. So macro had a bunch of problems, and it's now gone away. So if you're on a modern version of Asterisk, you really want to use GoSub anyway. It's been around for quite a while. I think at least since 1.6 in the series there. I'm pretty sure you can use it on 1.6.2. It doesn't nest very well. So if you want to go deep, it's also resource intensive because when you enter into the macro, so the question was, what's the problem with macro? When you enter into the macro, you're in that macro application. The macro application is literally running, so you're tying up resources. So if you have a lot of calls at once, it's not very efficient. You're in a macro application running, and then it also doesn't nest well. So sometimes, 7 levels deep, your macro fails, or maybe even less than that, depending on how complex your logic is. With GoSub, the beauty of it is that you can nest almost infinitely. So GoSub, rather than being in an application that's executing, it's very similar to Go2. In fact, I like to think of GoSub the same thing as Go2, but with two bonuses. It's kind of like Go2 with a little bonus. One of those bonuses is it's going to save an address to the stack. Okay? So if you imagine, let's look at this GoSub here in my internal underscore phones context. So here I have a GoSub, right? And this GoSub is just like Go2, and it's going to go to a Dialplan address. So this can be a context extension priority. It can be extension priority within the current context. It can simply be a priority within the current extension, which is awesome. You could not do that with macro. Macro had to go to its own context. With a GoSub, you can even do subroutines within a singular extension. So in this case, I'm going to go to another extension. I'm going to go to the main dial extension, priority 1. And then the other difference, along with saving an address to the stack, I'll talk about that more in a second, is that you're going to get arguments. You can pass arguments to the GoSub application the same way you could with macro. And very similar to macro, or very similar to AGI, these arguments become variables that you can then access in your subroutine. So let's look at this. I go here from the main dial. So if I were to execute extension 600, it's going to go to main dial extension 1. And you've noticed here I've passed some arguments. And this is like the SIP account, or the Find Me, Follow Me account name. This is going to be accessible as arg1. The extension number is going to be accessible as arg2. arg3 I've just left as an empty blank because I don't want to enable that feature. So arg3, 4, and 5 I've set up as toggle flags. This is kind of how the subroutine works. If they want Find Me, Follow Me, I put in FF for Find Me, Follow Me. If they don't, I leave it blank. And then I'm going to route conditionally based on that flag. Here's what it looks like. You go from the GoSub into the main dial. I verbose a little verbose logging. I say, I'm going to dial arg1 at arg2. So I'm dialing a Dorner at extension 600. That's what's going to show up on my CLI. Then I just do a little GoSub ifs. So now I'm going another layer down into the subroutine. Here I'm comparing, does arg3 equal FF? If it does, go to the follow me sub, the subroutine for Find Me, Follow Me. If it doesn't, well, just fall through to the next priority. So you see this scales very nicely because you could have like 20 or 30 steps there, whatever kind of features you want, and it's just going to fall through to the next priority. If the user wants that feature, you can enable it, and you can toggle it as a variable, right? So here, it's going to go to the follow me sub. The follow me sub is very simple. It's just follow me, priority 1, and it goes to the follow me application. I'll mention something, if you're not familiar with programming, what they call variable scope. Okay? Now, variable scope in a traditional programming language is only, it basically means when you go into a subroutine, that variable is only accessible within that subroutine. For example, I set arg1, the variable arg1, to a Dorner. And then I went to the main dial. So here I am. Within this subroutine, arg1 is going to be equal to Alan Dorner. But if I go another layer deep, Here, I go now to another subroutine. I'm going a layer deep, and I lose that variable. The variable, I've now gone out of the scope of that variable. So I need to pass it again to the next layer down. This is why here I pass arg1 from the previous layer up. I'm passing it to that layer down. So here in the follow me sub, I can access adorner, which is I've set up in followme.conf, the adorner account name, and I've passed A. So this is an idea when Alan gets a call on his cell phone, he can press 1 to accept or 2 not to accept, right? Same thing with a desk. I've done it a little bit different here. This is just to show you guys a little bit of wizardry, or there's a different way to do it. The idea is when I want to call the desk phone, I could pass arg1 as a variable like I did in the follow me subroutine. Here's another way to do it. I made arg1 part of the actual extension name. So in the desk subroutine, the desk phone subroutine, I set a pattern match. You can tell because I have an underscore. And then it starts with desk dash, and then the dot means anything else at all. So if I call it from, adorner, it would be desk dash adorner would match that pattern match. If I call it from rfergus, desk dash rfergus would match that pattern match. So what happens at the pattern match? Well, it's going to dial, and it's going to dial the SIP account, and I'm using the cut function to take the extension, which was desk dash adorner. I'm going to cut it based on the dash. So that kind of means like split it based on the dashes. So on one half it'll say desk, on the other half it'll say rfergus because it cut that extension name in half. And then I say give me the second half. So just give me the rfergus. So this is how I'm dialing SIP/rfergus. I do so for 20 seconds. Now, as we should be familiar from yesterday, when we exit the Dialplan application, it's going to set the dial status variable, typically no answer if I don't answer, busy if I hit ignore. And I want to pass that variable back up to the previous subroutine. So you see I'm going down levels. I want to pass it back up to the previous level. Now, technically, this is redundant because dial status is set on the channel, which has the top scope within the channel. It's not the top scope within the Dialplan, but the top scope within the channel. But I wouldn't rely on that. I would rather like to scope my variables. So in the return application, what the return application does is it says, hey, go back up to the next stack and continue executing. So when I call follow me sub, it goes to follow me sub, and then it returns back here to go to the next priority. When I call the desk sub, go to the desk phone sub, and then return to keep executing in that previous subroutine, right? The idea is I've passed dial status as a return value, and I can access the dial status in the GoSub ret val, which is kind of bumped a little off the screen here. But in the GoSub ret val, that's going to hold the value. So if I call the phone and the phone is busy, I'm going to pass busy to the return application. The return application is going to bump up to the previous Dialplan subroutine. And then within that next subroutine, I can access it from the variable GoSub ret val, which I've done when I go to the voicemail sub. In the voicemail sub, I pass args1, arg2, which are from the previous subroutine, and the GoSub ret val. So now that dial status is going to be accessible as arg3. Let's look at the voicemail sub. The voicemail sub says go to arg2, which if you remember, see I've passed it down 2 levels. Here it was extension 600. Now in this it's arg2, and I pass arg2 in. And so I can still access it here as arg2. Then I'm using the if function. If function, very simply, is going to return one value or another. So I want to return either B or U. So based on arg3, if arg3, which if remember is the GoSub ret val, which came from the dial status, which exited the dial status. You guys are following me, right? If arg3 is busy, and I just realized I was messing around with this during the 1, 2, 3. If arg3 is busy, then I want to return B, so I play the busy message. If not, I'd like to return U, and then I can return here, and at which point I hang up, or if I had more Dialplan logic. So if that was kind of a quick for you, I'll try to make my slide notes available, or you guys will be able to check the video, and you can kind of examine it in more detail. But off of this basic construct, it's allowing you can see as I dial each phone, it only has 1 line of code. So if I want to add 100 more phones, instead of having to add 300 more lines of code or 700 more lines of code, depending on how long my thing was, I just have to add 1 line for each phone, I can access a subroutine because I've used variables and the expressions and functions. I've made it scalable. So let's take a look at how it works. So in theory, what I'm treating this is this would be like Ryan Fergus's phone when I dial 601, right? So when I call 601 from the CLI, he should have Find Me, Follow Me enabled. We're going to treat this phone as though it's like his cell phone. So he should hear a prompt, you know, that sort of thing. And then if I reject it, then it should go to his desk phone and then voicemail. So live demo, let's find out if it actually works. I will use my local test extension. And I'm going to originate to 601 at internal_phones, which is where I had that context. So here it is. My GoSub begins to execute. And let's follow along with the debug routine. So I can see my test extension is playing. And now the Follow Me application is prompting the caller to say, hey, record your name, and we're going to play the name. So here my phone is ringing. Let's answer it.
In your general direction. Your mother was a hamster, and you're press 1 to accept this call, or 2 to reject it.
I do not want to accept that call. So I will hit 2. Hey, it's going through to my other phone. So let's answer.
And your father smelt of elderberries.
Gah, I don't. That's TT Monty Nights, right? So that's kind of the subroutine in action. Is it did the Find Me, Follow Me. It went through the other phone, and of course, I could have tested voicemail. I had a warning there, but it's not relevant to the subroutine. So let's see. How long do I have till? Till 3:05. Okay. So the last thing I want to show you guys very quickly is the concept of why you should do an AGI. If you're in the last session, you're like, hey, I'm down. But for those who are new to programming, the idea here is when you go to a Programming 101 class, very common, like the first script they make you write is to calculate Fibonacci numbers. Fibonacci was this Italian mathematician. And the idea here is you take two numbers, 0 and 1, you add them together, you get 1, right? So then you add 1 and 1 and you get 2. Add 1 and 2, you get 3. Add 2 and 3, you get 5. You guys see the pattern here. You keep on adding the two numbers, and it goes on and on and on. And they make you calculate this in a programming class. They'll say, I want to give you a term, like let's say the 10th term, and I want you to return the nth Fibonacci. So if I say 10, I want you to return to me 55, right? So again, I'm going to show a Dialplan example and an AGI example. Here is just I'm using the read application. These are going to call my subroutines. To, basically you would dial in what number do you want. It's going to write it to a variable called n. I'm going to do a GoSub with, in the Fibonacci context. Again, I'm using this trick where I've named the extension using a variable. So if I go to extension fib1, it'll give me the first term. If I go to fib10, it'll give me the 10th term, on and so forth. And then I'm returning the value with a GoSub retval, and I can use it to say the digits. This is exactly the same. The difference between the two is that this extension is called fib_AGI because it calls AGI. So here is what my Fibonacci sequence looks like. I'm not going to step through this step by step, but it's basically just it takes the two numbers and it adds them together, and then it shifts the values, and it keeps on calculating them. And the only thing I'll comment on is I'm using the argc here to find out if the extension was executed from the subroutine. So I want to be able to both execute it from the subroutine when I dial by the phone and to execute it directly when I test. So this part right here is not part of the actual subroutine. It's just saying, hey, if there's an argc, then use the return. If there's not argc, then just hang up, depending on how I call the subroutine. This, you can see, is significant fewer lines of code. In this case, I'm setting the extension, and I'm using the AGI to execute the AGI in Python. And let me show you the Python code. This is not all the Python code, but this is the Python code that calculates the Fibonacci number. So you can see, if you learn Python, see how much easier this is to program something simple like calculating Fibonacci numbers than it is to do this, right? So this is the Dialplan version. This is the normal full-featured programming language version. So the idea here is Dialplan is good for call routing, but it's not good for everything. When you want to do calculation, when you want to do complex programming, when you want to perhaps query multiple databases, it really behooves you to actually learn a real programming language, rather than just a scripting language. In my case, I've chosen Python here, so I can go to the CLI here, and I think that I can demo it very quickly what it looks like. If I dial 101,
Please enter the number you wish to call.
what term should I do? 7.
1, 3.
So 13 is the 7th Fibonacci term. And you guys can see how it went, and that one executed my AGI Fibonacci. So the idea is if I do 100, this is, now just look at this real quick. This is the amount of, just very little, maybe a screen's worth of, verbose output. If I dial 100,
Please enter the number you wish to call. 1, 3.
so that worked as well, but look at how much output it went through. So I really don't want to see all that on the Dialplan. There are some guys that like to do all the programming in the Dialplan, but I would say Dialplan is good for call routing. If you want to go a little bit beyond that, learn a little bit of programming language, I will recommend to you some resources. So in particular, there are many resources online. MIT OpenCourseWare, I've already mentioned, is phenomenal. Code Academy, Coursera, and in particular, I highly recommend if you are an IT guy, if you're a networking guy, if you're a telco guy, and you're like, I just want to learn a little bit of development. This is what I am. I'm not a developer. I tell people I'm a coder, not a developer. Then check out the Udacity courses. The Udacity are very, very nice, and you can learn a little bit of programming and do some powerful things with it. As a last resource, I would recommend the Asterisk Cookbook. It's available online. Life and those guys wrote it. It has some really nice recipes in there for Dialplan scripting. And just want to say thank you guys very much.
Thank you, Billy. And once again, we have an expert in our presence, so anybody have any questions? I'm not going to make you go up to the stand.
We have a question right here.
Mm-hmm. Can you show an example of that?
Of passing variables to originate?
Yeah. So you're calling your local to do a test, but inside your Dialplan, you're looking for variables that are being passed in.
Okay, so the question is when I'm looking for variables with my originate command. So let's take a look at that real quickly at extensions.conf, and let's go to my test extension, which if I can find, of course I have too many things called test in here.
While you're looking, Billy, you neglected to mention that Google is your friend.
Yes.
And almost every programmer in every language, and that includes extensions. The first time I learned how to use extensions, I've just found somebody's extensions file online.
Okay.
Do a search and you'll find it.
So certainly, yeah, search for extensions.conf. What I have personally found is a lot of times people, the reason they've posted their extensions.conf is because it's broken and they want some help troubleshooting.
It's true.
Yeah, as Google is your friend and pound asterisk. Those guys are wicked awesome. And when you get in there, just go to pastebin.com, paste your Dialplan in there, paste your logs in there, be polite to those guys because they want to help you out, but they're doing it out of their goodwill. And then you go into the IRC chat room and you say, hey, here's the link. Can somebody help me and ask your question specifically? And that is also a great resource to you. So I want to point out here that I'm using some variables in this test subroutine. So for example, I'm setting count. Oh, of course. You guys would like to see that, wouldn't you? So in this case, I'm using, if you guys can see that at this line here, I answer the channel, I set count, and count equal to 1, okay? There's a couple ways to find out what your variables are called. First of all, they just show up, but additionally, I'm going to show a couple. I'm going to show no-op, and the value of count is. count. Okay, so that's going to tell me what's in there. I'm going to also do chan dump. Is it dump chan? Dump chan. We'll find out. Let's try this just in case. I don't know if that'll even execute.
Hedging your bets.
Let's find out. Okay, so we're doing local test to extension test. Okay. So let's look at the execution here and see if I can. So it's obviously it's playing through the file now, but take note that the file's a little too long to play. Okay, there we go. Okay, so here we go. We can see it's saying set, and if you remember the logic was set count to its previous value plus 1. So here on the CLI, even just without any debugging, it's telling me I set count equal to 1. So in the Dialplan, this was a variable, or is actually a variable inside of an expression. And here in the CLI, it's evaluated. But additionally, here's my no-op. The value of count is 1, so I can see the value of that. And it got to a dump chan, and it dumps the channel data. So this is really nice because it's showing you all the variables on that channel. And it looks like chan dump was the one, no application chan dump. So dump chan is what we want. Chan dump, don't do that one. In any case, this is nice. It's going to give you the name of the channel. All of this data is on the channel. And then if you have variables set, it shows you your variables. So here count is equal to 1, and playback status is equal to success. Those are variables on the channel. We have any other questions? Right over here.
When you call a subroutine with arguments, is it passing it by value or by reference?
It is, okay, so the question is, are we passing it by value or by reference? And the answer is that I think that it's going to actually pass it by reference. So if you noticed, I'll show you what I'm talking about. Here in my subroutine. So for example, you notice that I actually pass here. I pass a variable as an argument. So that's not passing the literal string $ext : it's actually passing in the value of that variable because I've dereferenced it. It's going to pass in 600. So 600 is going to be available in arg in arg2.
Well, I guess what I'm getting at is, can you modify the value in the subroutine, and will that value automatically be understood by the calling extension? Or that's
If I want to modify the value from within the subroutine.
right of the argument that you passed.
Okay, so for example, if I had something here, and I wanted to say set, and I want to say something like this, like arg1. Actually, that's not. Okay, well let's just do it this way. Test equals to arg1, and then maybe something like 456 or 567 or whatever. I guess I'm not quite sure what you'd want to accomplish, but here it's gonna pass in, instead of arg1, it's gonna be adorner. So I'm now creating the string adorner 567. If I do it this way, I'm now like overwriting that variable, where I'm creating a channel variable called arg1, and I'm overwriting the value of arg1 with arg1 567, or with adorner 567, and that's probably going to be a little bit wonky. I will tell you guys, it's I said it's scoped, but it's not actually totally. That's not actually totally the case. It's actually masked, and so I was trying to keep it simple, but. The idea is so for example, if you do a chan dump, you'll actually see the levels of your subroutine, that you actually have multiple arg1s depending on what level you're in, and that if you want to really scope it down, you can use the local function. And so if you want to keep a function, a variable local just to that subroutine, and you don't want it to be messed with, you can scope it down with a local function, and then when you exit the subroutine, the variable goes away. We have any other questions, or is it time for the next talk? What time do I go till?
I think the question that was being begged a second ago is really, are there global vegetables, global variables? Isn't that what you said?
Oh, okay.
Isn't that what you asked? Yeah.
So
Is there a global scope?
okay, so is there a global scope? I'm picking up what you're putting down. Yes, so there's several ways to use global variables. So for example, in your Dialplan here, okay, Dialplans, it's not quite like, you can't compare it to Python in terms of scope, because scope is related to the subroutine, but it's also related to the channel, right? So if I want a variable that's global in scope across all of my subroutines, I can set a channel variable, and it's accessible to all of my subroutines. So kind of like I said, dial status is a channel variable. It's on that channel. As long as that channel is up, it's accessible in any subroutine. So in that sense, it's kind of global in scope. However, there are something in Dialplan called global variables. You can set them in a couple ways. So in the global section, I can just set var equals value. And now I've got a variable called var, and it's set with the value. And it's global in the sense that it's accessible on all of my channels. Regardless of what channel I'm on, I can access that variable var. And you can also do it with the global function. So I'll just go down here and say I want to do something like this. What do we figure out that this one was bad? And I want to say set and then use the global function and var something like that. I don't want to dereference it. I want to set it equals new val. So here what I've done is now when I load my Dialplan, the globals in the global section are going to be available on all of my channels, really truly global in scope, on all my channels and all my subroutines. In this particular test script that I've written, when I get down to this priority, I'm now overwriting the value of that global var using the global function, and I'm putting a new value in there. So there's multiple ways that you can set global variables.
Actually, I don't know if you mentioned this. I had to go out for a second, but there's also a database function, correct, for persistent variables. Did you get into that at all? It's kind of complicated.
I didn't talk about that. That's an excellent point. So you can use the db function, and the idea is, how would I do this? I would say like set, and then I could say db, and then I would have like family key. I forget the syntax. I need to do CLI show equals some stuff here. It's similar to that. We can do core show function db if you do core show. Does that look good to you?
Yeah, and I don't know about the syntax, but the point being, this is something that comes up a lot. You want to maybe save a state of something, and when you reboot, the state is still there. You can reboot the entire machine with this system.
The AskDB is going to be persistent across reboots. So if you need a variable in persistent state, you can save it into a key in the AskDB using the db function. And I don't know my syntax, but the idea is you can use the db function and set it in there, and then you can dereference it using the db function, and you can call for that whatever's in that in the AskDB. And the AskDB used to be just like a simple Berkeley DB, and I think they've updated to SQLite. So
very powerful.
Is the double underscore method of declaring a global appreciated?
No, that is. I can see how you would call that a global variable. So that, in my understanding, really when you're talking about variable inheritance. So the idea would be I have one channel and I'm bridging it with another channel, and I want that variable available on the other channel. So an example would be I'm calling from one phone, and let's say I want to set like a call recording toggle or something like that, right? And when I call on one channel, I set that variable, but it's only set on that channel. When I bridge it to another channel, it's not set on that channel. If I declare the variable with a single underscore, it'll be inherited by channels created by the original channel. So you get kind of like what they call single inheritance. If you use a double underscore, it's able, and that's like just to be able to inherit it like one level. If you create double underscore, it's able to be inherited by multiple channels. I don't know if I'm totally explaining that right. I guess we would call that, in a sense, that makes it like a global variable because you have double underscore. That variable you've set on one channel is now available on other channels. But it's really, and actually I don't even know in the code if it's the same mechanism. To me, it seems like two different mechanisms, but you could probably get there the same way where you're setting global variable, it's available on all your channels, double underscore, it's being inherited from a channel. So you can also,
I'm sorry.
yeah, there's a lot of stuff with variables and variable inheritance, but.
Okay, we're getting down to the wire here because if anybody wants to take a break, you have about 14 minutes to do so.
Okay. Hey,
Billy, thank you.
Thank you guys very much.
Let's hear it for Billy. Such a great teacher, we don't want to let him go.